Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to the first ever Bohunt Education Trust Improving Your Application webinar. And it's great to have everybody with us this evening. And this is designed to help and to exemplify the strengths in applications to Bohunt Education Trust schools. So I'm Polly, by the way, Director of Communications for BET, and this evening we've got 5 utterly brilliant BET leaders, all of whom are going to share a brief insight into their developmental experiences at BET. And they're also going to explain how to shape applications for the amazing opportunities that we have at BET schools. So a little bit of housekeeping before we start. This webinar will be recorded and circulated after the event. And at the end of the event, there'll be a short survey and an opportunity to submit a paragraph of copy to our leaders here for scrutiny and feedback. So please do take us up on that opportunity. The webinar is going to be an hour long, and there are going to be just very brief presentations from our leaders and then some pre-submitted questions that they'll answer, followed by an opportunity for you to submit questions via the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen. So do take that opportunity when it arises to type in any any questions. And then there'll be a short conclusion from our panelists. So without further ado, Neil, over to you.
Good evening. Please don't be too worried if your line manager shared this webinar with you. There is no hidden message there at all. And if you're not in BET, then particularly warm welcome. I'm just going to share my screen with you and we'll begin. So I'm Neil Strowger, Trust Leader of the Bohunt Education Trust, a family of 9 secondary schools now and over 11,000 students. So I think over 12 years or so of leading schools and longer being involved in interview panels, I've probably seen it all. I've certainly had tears, temper, watched somebody kind of just go into a mental health breakdown in front of me, lots of anger as well, but lots of other interviews that have been entertaining, and I've certainly learned from. So what we're going to try and do is give you the benefit of our experience, and along the way I've recruited 9 head teachers, very many senior leaders, and literally hundreds of teachers, and the market has certainly moved over those years of doing interviews, and we're at that point, I think, where we are probably moving into a more competitive market again, because for a long time it's very much been the seller's market, particularly if that seller was a mathematician or a scientist. So what you will find, and what I want to talk about now, is that it's about finding the right school for you as much as the school finding the right person for them. I remember one of the very first promoted posts I went to, and I can't remember if I was an NQT or an RQT, but my feedback was that I did the best interview, but we're giving the job to Sean because he's been here for 5 years. If that's the culture of the school, then you've probably dodged a bullet there, and it's very much their loss. So what I would say is that as I mentioned, it's a two-way street, that we're looking at you, but you're looking at us, and it really, really pays to do your research. And some things won't change. If the school is too far and the commute is too long, then the school is too far and the commute is too long. However great the school, however great the people, if you're not going to be able to get there in a reasonable time, it's not worth doing. Equally, schools can flatter to deceive. They can have great Ofsted reports, they can have great outcomes for students, but then when you visit, it might be that you're just not feeling any of that. You feel an institution that feels oppressive, claustrophobic. It's an emotional response, I think, walking into a school. like buying a house. It can have the right number of bedrooms, be in the right part of town, have a nice garden, but if you walk in and it's just not doing it, then it's not the right house. Schools are like that. And I think you really do need to do your research ahead of time and try and visit the school so that you're not wasting your time and you're not wasting the interview panelists' time either. So last point for me, because I'm probably already close to being out of time, is it's so much more than a job, teaching, and all of us that sit on interview panels will be looking for a whole host of things. One of those, above all else, is probably going to be enthusiasm. And do not worry if the interview feels like it is slipping away from you, would be my final word. I did a car crash interview with a colleague who basically chewed his visitor badge for the duration of the interview, but has subsequently had 3 promotions and is doing very, very well within BET. So things are never quite what they seem. And that's enough from me for now. I'm going to pass to Sameena.
Thank you, Neil. So I'm Sameena, and I'll be presenting this slightly differently because I'm the person who's in the classroom. I'm a trust lead practitioner for BET, and I've been teaching in education for over 20 years. My specialism is mathematics, but I've also done an MA economics before that, and then I did MA in mathematics education. I'm also a Pearson's examiner. My journey into education started quite differently because I am actually educated abroad. My childhood and my up to the master's degree, I actually did it abroad, and I came to England where I did my PGCE. And once I did my PGCE, I really wanted to learn the education system or how it all develops develops within the United Kingdom. So if I was to talk about my journey, that the whole time I've always wanted to be in the classroom. So for that reason, I tried to take small steps in creating a portfolio for myself that would ensure that I just develop really well as a classroom teacher. So when it came to finishing my NQT year, I became a Key Stage 4 maths coordinator, where I only focused on one area of mathematics, and that was mainly with the GCSE groups. Then slowly I went on to take on STEM coordinator role, which required me to have external and internal roles. When I felt that I have kind of got into these types of roles within the department, I felt that I need to take more responsibility as managing the department, where I became the deputy head of mathematics. And then I went on to take on the role of the AMA coordinator, which was a very, very creative role. And now currently I am one of the best lead practitioners in mathematics. The lead practitioner mathematics role is a really creative role, and it kind of is a collectiveness of my experiences and my portfolio for all these years. The list of what I do is there, and coaching and mentoring, being really involved with everyday teaching of different members of staff, taking things from them, giving things from them, and giving things to them. It's a really exciting role. Designing and leading staff CPD, again, is something that's really exciting, and it's something I feel that I have gained experience from year after year. The enrichment opportunities, they could be for the children, they could be the staff, and in one word, it's a really, really exciting and creative role, but it's a collectiveness of what I've done all these years. So the reason I've done that is because I always thought that coming to this position, what is it that an employer would really want to see? And an employer wants to see someone who really loves their mathematics, loves their subject, and that's definitely what I'm about. That I do have the love of my subject, and then who enjoys their role, who loves the stress and challenge, who's got the ability to be part of the team, who's an excellent communicator. And also maybe a leader. The leadership may not come with experience in the classroom, but it could be things like DOV or taking on or scouts or anything like that. but it's really putting everything in front of employers so they can see that what you're all about. And most importantly, it is about making informed choices. So just remembering that whoever you're going to, that it's not only them making the choice, it's you as well making that choice. That be in touch with a department you would like to join, and so that you know what they're about. Do your research about the department, do your research about the school, and give yourself time to prepare so that you're aware that, so that you are comfortable with the interview process or the application process. And it's a two-way thing, as I said, that be prepared with questions, that what is it that the employer is going to be offering to you that you think that actually this is what, where you want to be. So that's where I am at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. It's me next. And Phil, I think you're going to be my able assistant with my slides. Thank you. So I'm Isabel Stirling, Head of HR for the Trust. I have come up this, I guess, from a different direction in having worked in HR for too many years, and I've stopped counting. That means they don't count anymore. And I've worked in a number of different sectors, manufacturing, hospitality, retail, financial services, and then for the last 5 years in vets. And often when I'm recruiting, I'm not recruiting anyone actually for my team, I'm supporting the process. So I tend to come at this quite coldly probably and quite objectively, but I think it echoes some of the things that Neil and Sameena have already said. So I'd start with do your research, find out about the organisation and find out about the role. What is the person? What's the kind of person that they want in that role? For us, what are the values of our organisation? What are the values of the school? Each school in the trust has similarities and differences. What's the flavour of that school? And I'd say in finding that information, if it's not attached to an advert, ring up, ask the question. It's another way of getting yourself noticed. Ask to speak to people who are involved. You promote yourself, but you also find out lots more about the role and about whether, as Neil already said, is that where you want to be. And then when you've done that research, I'd say structure your evidence, because certainly sitting in interview panels and also shortlisting applications, I don't want to hear, personally, I don't want to hear jargon. I don't want to hear what people say they can do. I want evidence to demonstrate that they can do those things. So on my next slide, which Phil is going to put up for me, thank you. I've put one suggested structure example, and I'll quickly walk you through what I think this would look like. So I've taken the example of, I know in some of our schools we run camps in the summer holidays for those Year 6 students who are about to come into our Year 7. And that's about preparing them, integrating their school, orientating them to the buildings, getting them to know their tutor group, all of those kind of things. And I thought, how would you sell that was a leadership experience using this particular structure? So the situation, what is it? It's quite clear. When organising the Year 6 camp last summer, this is what I did. And the tasks, I'd be very brief about the task and the responsibility, but what was it about? What was its purpose? What were you trying to achieve? And was this particular task, not in this example, but was this other task given to you? Was it your idea, something you volunteered for? And then into the action, what did you specifically do to meet the objectives of the tasks? And how did you go about doing it such that it demonstrates your skills? It gives me as the interviewer evidence that you can do those things. So thinking about our camp example, writing flyers, how did you promote the task, make it appealing to local schools? How did you make the admin process simple so parents felt engaged with it, felt confident in what their children were coming to, that it was really well organised? Leading a team of people, how did you get volunteers or people to help come up and give a bit of time on their summer holidays, and how did you lead them? Did you delegate any tasks to them to setting up the camp and then delivering it? And so then on to your result, what was the outcome specifically in our context? What was the difference that you made to those students? How can you measure that? How can you measure that? How can you demonstrate? Can you show a difference in engagement in learning coming into the autumn term in Year 7? Those kind of things. Again, it's showing that evidence that it's not just what you did, but how you did it and how well you did it. And then what did you do well? That's your reflection. And what didn't go well as hoped? Were there any particular events that didn't work very well? Did you have a number of dropouts through the week? People had booked in to attend the entire week and didn't attend. Did you find out why that was? And strengthen, therefore, is what could you do differently next time? How could you make it even better? How could you make your achievements make the camp, in this example, an even greater success? So it always comes back down to me for evidence, and if you can structure that evidence and make sure it's as clear as possible, it really helps the interviewer and really helps sell you. And that's me. I think it's Georgette next.
Thank you, Isabel. Right, evening everybody. I'm Georgette Ayling. I am head teacher at Bohunt Horsham. We're the third new school and will be the first all through school in Bet. Currently though, we're open to secondary phase students. I wanted to share with you three things because as a new school, we have had a really high number of applicants for so many of our roles that when I looked back and reflected over the last couple of years, I think I've read over 1,000 applications in those 2 years. And so there certainly are three things that really stand out to me from that process. The first one is personalisation, and my colleagues have already touched on this, but what I want to see is why us and why now, and that's both at application and in the interview stage. I want to know that you're aware of what makes us unique as a school, and I want to know that you've thought about that, because just like Neil said, when you get that feeling of looking at a house and knowing if it's the right house for you, and a school if it's the right school for you, I want to know that you've really thought about that. It's really obvious in an application when somebody is looking for an out from their current school rather than an in to your school. And so I really appreciate when I see a candidate has thought about what working here in this school would be like. So for me, the first and most important thing is personalisation. Do you really understand who we are, and does that fit with you? And then that leads into the second thing for me. The second thing is values. And I know Isabel already touched on this also. Why teaching and why your subject? What's important to you? Whether you're applying as a newly qualified teacher, currently completing your PGCE, or you're applying as an assistant head teacher, you're being recruited for a teaching role. In fact, all leaders across Bet teach, from the CEO across all the head teachers and the subject directors and Phil. We are all classroom teachers because classroom teachers is the business of what we do. It's what we're passionate about. And I want to see that in an applicant. I want to know why you love your subject and that you can transfer that love to the students that you teach. And I want to know why you think it's so important that your subject has a place in the curriculum, because that's a real passion that is contagious that students will pick up. So the first thing was personalisation. The second thing was values. And for me, the third thing is impact. So quite often in an application, I'll see a list of all the things you did, but I don't have a lot of information about what those things did in terms of the impact they had on young people. And Isabel's structure example was a really great way of putting that together in your application or demonstrating that in your interview. A list of things that make up your job isn't helpful to me, but a real focus on what you've achieved, a change that you've driven, an impact that you've had on young people is really powerful for me. It may be, though, that you haven't ever been a senior leader. Perhaps you haven't had a whole school responsibility. But today we're going to talk to you about an opportunity for sharing your ideas and for us to give you feedback on how those ideas might be a great example to put in your application. But it will be the case that you have done something on whatever scale that has had an impact on learners, whether that's one, a group, a class, a year group, or a whole school. And those are the things that for me really stand out in an application. This problem that I identified, this process that I put in place had this impact and changed outcomes for young people, because that's a really key part of our values here at Bet. We are all passionate about removing obstacles for young people and helping them to have the best success that they possibly can. And that's what I want to see in an applicant. Thank you. I'll hand over now to Phil.
Right, good evening all. My name's Phil Avery. I'm Director of Education for Bohunt Education Trust. And I've got a question for you really before I go any further, which is when you picture education, what's the picture that you see? It could be a picture in the classroom. It could be a picture out of the classroom. It could be something your students are doing or something you're doing. But what is that picture of an education that you want to deliver to young people? And once you've got that picture, does it excite you? Does it interest you? Will it excite and interest students? Will it set them up for a meaningful future? Because it's that picture that I want you to bring across in your application and that I'm interested to understand and to get an idea of during the process. A little bit about myself and the route to get to this position. It took me a while to find teaching and to realize it was something I was passionate and interested about. And I was very lucky in that the route I took to get to teaching taught me a lot along the way. The leadership experience I'd had from being a store manager and from being a product manager was something I've been able to bring into teaching. Furthermore, there are some things around the corporate world that education could learn from. There are some things it shouldn't learn from, but there are many things it can learn from. And being able to bring those into my role or roles within teaching has been of benefit. Once I got into teaching, I was very clear that I was passionate about learning and teaching. And that's not to say that you should stay with one area. That's what I did. I've always been involved with learning and teaching all the way through, but that's not to say that's something you have to do. But it's just the area that really interests me. And I've been very lucky to continually learn from others and develop and continue to do so due to the fantastic range of subject specialists such as Sameena on the call with regards to learning and teaching. So when I'm looking at an application, what am I trying to get a sense of? For me, it's your views on learning, your views on that picture of learning that you're going to bring to the organisation, to our schools, and most importantly, to our students. Are you interested not only in what you're teaching, the content, but the relationships that you have with students and building their intrinsic motivation, therefore having an impact not only in some sort of assessment, but also in their lives going forwards? How would I get a sense that you can do that? Well, partly it's that you can articulate the why, not just what you're going to do, but why you do that. That you're interested in learning that isn't just because it's on a specification, but that it's important and powerful and interesting for students to know, that you can relate it to the current context, that you know what's going on in the news and you can bring that into your lessons, that you know about important issues that students should be aware of regardless of a specification or a curriculum. And then what is the impact you're looking to have for students? And finally, that you're willing to challenge. That's the students, that's me, the status quo. Our vision as a trust is to develop students that are game changers. And to do that, we have to live that vision ourselves. And therefore we should be nudging, pushing, challenging. And that's the sense of that, who you are, why you do things, and that picture of education is what I'd love to see in applications more often. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you to all our panelists for your presentations. Now, what we're going to do next is just go to a few of the pre-submitted questions, and I'm going to ask a few of our panelists to answer some of those questions that have come in. So the first one is, what is your view on people asking questions at interview? So Isabel, what's your view?
I think it's only a good thing. I think it demonstrates interest, it demonstrates curiosity, it demonstrates the passion that we've talked about already. If someone's done some good research, they may have had lots of their answers already established, but I think there's no harm in saying that, saying actually the things I wanted to know were these three things, and that's what I find out. But I think it's really important that somebody sees it as a two-way process and not just answering questions.
Thank you. And Neil?
Shows my intolerance, but I find it quite irritating because I think people turn up to an interview thinking they've got to ask a question. So they ask some fairly asinine questions. I think as Isabel said, it's far better to have said, I've actually found the answers to the questions I had, because it shows that you've taken an active interest in finding that out, rather than the lazy route, which is asking someone at interview. I think you have to, there's probably no right or wrong answer, but I think do take into account the interview panel's time. They may have a lot of candidates that they're interviewing, and they don't really want you to open a notebook and ask them, you know, half a dozen questions. And equally, I don't think that's fair on the other candidates. You have plenty of time before the interview to ask questions and find answers. So I would say only really ask a question if it's something you're genuinely really interested in, rather than you think it's the right thing to do. But that might be my personal preference rather than really sage advice.
Thank you. No, it's very, very valuable answers for both of you. The next question that was sent in was, what makes the difference between an applicant making the shortlist and not? So Georgette, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's so difficult, because I'm always really conscious that writing an application is its own skill set, and there could absolutely be some complete diamonds who would be perfect for the job who I miss because writing the application just isn't something that they feel particularly strong at. I think, as I said, impact and values are really, really important. I also want to see, you know, in terms of values, something like the highest expectations. So for us, a culture of highest expectations is something really a part of who we are and what we do. And I need to see that in your application. So it might be that you talk about progress rather than attainment, and you're really understanding that highest expectations is for all learners, whatever their starting point. Something as small as that can really indicate that your values align with ours, and that would make you stand out from the crowd.
Thank you. Phil, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just one practical piece, which is keep it to the point, keep it efficient. You know, Georgette there with her 1,000 applications, I think you do need to be careful with the length of the written answers. And then the final piece is, if you can imagine an awful lot of applications, you're going to need to stand out in some way to make the shortlist. And there are various ways, I suppose, of doing that. It can be by challenging. It can be by giving something away about yourself that really gives a sense of who you are. It could be about suggesting something that's based on your research on the organization, or something that you've noticed. So maybe you don't want to be too confrontational, but just something you've noticed from the data that really sort of stands you out and makes the person reading your application think.
Okay, thanks. I think, Phil, you've semi-answered the next question, but the next question is, can you give me an example of or describe a really standout application? And that, I mean, I wanted to ask Isabel if there was anything that you could sort of suggest would make something really stand out.
I think I'd say similar to Phil, actually, particularly when you have got 1,000 applications, the clearer you can be, the more bulleted you can be, the better, because that does, it naturally makes it so much easier to understand what that person is about. And I think also, if, as I said before, not just a list of the person of your responsibilities, but what you've achieved, going back to Georgette's word, impact, you're pulling that out, very clearly laying it out is a standout for me.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have is, what are you looking for in a fantastic teacher? And Neil, could you answer that?
Yeah, I think there's so many things, actually, but I know I personally will forgive a multitude of sins if someone can engage the panel and hold our attention, and actually really has a drive and a desire to work for us, wants the job. Obviously, that's huge, and as I say, you'll overlook other deficiencies, but you have to have ability in the classroom. That's why we still ask people to teach. That's why we're moving in a smaller way to going to visit candidates in their own schools and watching them teach, which is really, really powerful, because that ultimately is the reason why, well, assuming you're going for a teaching job, but that is the preeminent quality, is the being able to teach. And for me, a good indication that somebody is able to teach is that they can engage the interview panel, and they obviously have relevant qualifications in the discipline which they are going to teach. But I think an enthusiastic approach, rather than somebody who looks like they've had a really bad day and would rather be almost anywhere than in the room talking to you at that moment.
Okay, great. And Georgette, what do you look for?
Somebody who's adaptive. I've seen probably 1,000 different things go wrong in interview lessons, but that is really typical of our everyday experience in the classroom. So I want to see somebody who has the tools at their disposal to take the lesson in a different direction, because that's the right thing to do, to adapt their teaching to suit the children they have in front of them. I think all too often when you ask a candidate to reflect on their lesson, they talk about how much they enjoyed it. And with all due respect, that's not what we're here to do. I want them to talk about the progress that the students made in that lesson, or where that would fit in a sequence of learning. And they can only do that if that's what they're focused on in their interview lesson. So adaptive for me would be the key thing.
Good stuff. Thank you. Okay, next question is, what makes BET leaders exceptional? Sameena, what do you think?
I think as a BET leader, you should be able to demonstrate that you are there for the children, to teach them the best way as possible. You're able to inspire the children, you're able to inspire your colleagues to do better, to reflect. You're able to demonstrate the love of subject, and you're able to forward that to the children and to your colleagues. You're able to engage in CPD and deliver CPD in the most effective way. You're able to reflect on your practice and help other colleagues also reflect on their practices and develop on that. So and be an excellent communicator for the children and your colleagues as well.
Okay, thank you. Georgette, any further thoughts?
I completely agree with what Sameena has said there. I think that we are all really engaged in research, and that is something that's really important. BET leaders will spend a lot of time talking about what makes their subject a success or their area of responsibility have impact, and sharing with one another. So I think for me, this was the best organisation for my first headship, because I knew I would have around me a community of support of BET leaders who were always willing, exactly as Sameena said, to be reflective about their own practice. Nobody in this organisation thinks that they are a finished product, and that's really important for all of us.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, I'm going on to the last pre-submitted question now. So if anybody at this point feels that they'd like to submit questions via the Q&A, please sort of start typing now so we can have a look after the answers to this one. The final question is, how should my application be structured? Have you got any top tips? So Isabel, you mentioned your STARS structure, but do you have any other sort of hot tips?
I think I'd just say be as clear as possible. I also think in defence of some of my HR colleagues who then often process an application, the basic stuff like don't leave gaps, make it really clear what your entire career has been, those sorts of things, answer the questions that are asked on the application form that's in front of you. It sounds really basic, but that just makes it so much clearer and demonstrates that you've thought about what this organisation is wanting from you.
Thank you. Phil, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think obviously part of it will probably be an application form. And so that's going to structure your application for you. But do think through why they're asking the question, just in case if you've got something quirky about your past, your qualifications, you're thinking through what extra information the school might need to get past that quirkiness. I can think of an example where someone had all of his qualifications from another country, and therefore made it really clear how they matched across. That was really helpful. When you get to the extended writing piece, or you bring in a letter, I noticed in the Q&A that Jenna had asked about subheadings. I think subheadings can be really useful. I think what are you doing? You're helping someone reading it get to the key points really quickly. I think personalize early on in the extended writing, personalize to the advert, to the school, to yourself. And then I think don't try and cover absolutely everything in the written piece, because it leads to lots of surface level points rather than us really getting to understand a few specific examples or a few things about you and your approach. Don't be worried about explaining things that might need to be explained to help the panel. And then finally, just as I've said during my presentation, trying to just sort of stand out a little bit. So leave the person with something to think about that's reading it in some way.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Phil. Right, well, I would like to invite anyone who would like to type a question in the Q&A section down below. We've had a couple come in, a few come in, and Phil's alluded to Jenna's question about subheadings already. There's a good one here, which is how long would you expect a good covering letter to be? And how many examples of skills would you include in that? So, I don't know, perhaps that's one for you, Neil. You see a lot of covering letters.
Yeah, I would say 2 sides of A4 is an absolute maximum, and do not shrink the font as a way of making it fit 2 pages. You need to be able to write concisely, and again, don't take liberties with the shortlisters. If you write 6 pages, then they're not going to read it. And again, you're suggesting that you're somebody who can't keep to the point. So I would also think about how you want to structure that letter. That you'll usually be given guidance as to what to cover in that application. And as Phil said, I think it's really, really important to personalize it and to the school, because I think we get far too many letters that are generic letters that they've clearly used for other job applications, and sometimes people don't even remove the name of the previous school, which doesn't really go down very well. Read the website, read the information that you're sent, and best of all, visit, and then weave that into your letter of application. It's really your chance to show and to answer the questions that you would like to be asked at interview, as it were. Your chance to sell. I think as for number of skills, I don't think that matters. I would make your letter interesting, but also show what you can do and what you've done. And that's really important, I think, as we've talked about in previous answers, is show the impact of things that you have done or led. And they don't have to be whole school, they don't have to be revolutionary, but I think if you can show that you're somebody who is happy to move things forward, that doesn't just sit back and wait to be told what to do, and has shown initiative, then the letter is a really, really good place to show that, but never over 2 sides, and I would say never larger than font 11. I mean smaller, sorry, or larger for that matter, because you don't want great big letters on a page. That wouldn't work either.
Okay, Georgette has asked to answer the following question from Jenna, which is, what advice would you give for someone who's completing an internal interview? Because these always seem harder as you're known.
Yeah, I wanted to answer this question because I have done a few, and I do agree that it can feel as though it's harder. There's nowhere to hide in an internal interview, because exactly as you said, Jenna, you are known. But I would actually flip it on its head and say that actually that makes it easier. One of the advantages that you have is to be able to talk about the students who at least many members, if not all the members of the panel, know and care about, and that gives you the edge. You know, when you're talking about removing obstacles for a group of young people, or for one particular individual, that's an individual or a group that your panel have already, you know, an established responsibility for and relationship with. And I think that is a really powerful thing to have in interview. But also in terms of advice, I would say it's absolutely vital to consider yourself, any other candidate, and to talk to the people you know who might be involved in the process or present during the process about treating you that way too. So you're arriving on the day exactly as any other candidate. You leave your role and responsibilities at home, and you don't do anything that's related to your everyday role and responsibilities. I think that's also really important, to give yourself the best chance to be seen in the best light. But I think there are definitely advantages to being an internal candidate, and it's important, if you're feeling really nervous about being internal, to remind yourself of those.
Thank you. Right, we've had one come in from Mr. Barrow. If you had two very strong and equally matched candidates, what would be the bigger deal breaker? Would it be interview, lesson, or maybe just an X factor? Phil, what do you think?
So I think it's, I've mentioned two things, and other panelists may well have others, but for me, it's one around their ability to reflect. So I would be as swayed by someone that had a really honest appraisal of the lesson they've taught in the interview as I would by someone that had taught an absolutely stellar lesson in the classroom, because that ability to self-reflect, to understand how it had worked for the children that were in front of that person, is a really strong feature. And then secondly, we always think of interviews as very individual, but I'm also interested in how that individual will work with others. We are a team within BET. We are a team within schools. We're a team across schools. You know, if you're teaching a subject in BET, you are working within a department. You've got subject specialists like Sameena and the subject directors and the subject coordinators coming into your classroom. You've got senior leaders from within your school and across the trust that may be popping in to see what's going on and what good things they can take to spread across the trust. So it's also trying to get a sense of how you fit into a team and how you work with others that would make the difference for me.
Lovely, thank you. The next question that's come in from Sarah is, what advice would you give for someone looking to move from working within a school to across BET, across the trust? Neil, over to you for that one.
Thanks, Polly. I think my advice there would be to think about what makes you successful in how you work within your school. And that's highly likely to be about communication and effective communication. And I think it's about how does that then scale, and how do you influence people that you don't see every day? Because that's a really big challenge for people. It's okay, you know, you can run a department really successfully, you can have a whole school responsibility, but one of the things you can't do as easily working in multiple locations is you can't go and have the conversation, you can't maintain the relationship as easily as you can if you're, you know, teaching in the classroom next door. But I would say it's just scalability and thinking very much about the communication aspects of the role.
Okay. And so the next question that's come in is, what advice would you give when moving from a subject leadership role to a school leadership one? And who would like to answer that?
I'll answer that one.
Yeah.
I think, you know, Neil also already said scalability, and that's really important. A lot of what you do is scalable on a grander scale across school leadership, but also it's about your relationships with staff. So understanding that the best approach isn't to talk about what you do in your English lessons, always if you're giving advice to the head of the STEM faculty or the head of PE in a whole school responsibility role. So I think there is an element of humility needed and understanding how those other subjects work. So if you're in a subject, for example, like humanities, you need to understand the parameters that a subject like science have, the health and safety requirements that food technology have, those kinds of things. So getting to understand those parameters, those opportunities in the other subjects, but actually that what is scalable is what you do to facilitate the colleagues within your subject leadership role would work across the whole school. What you do to facilitate and enable people to be the best they can be, just on a bigger scale. So I think understanding that is really important.
Can I add to that? I think moving to whole school leadership as well, the operational aspects. So how do finances work at whatever level you're aiming for? Operationally, Georgette's already mentioned health and safety, but how does that work? Relationship with the parents, all of those kind of things. I think it's thinking about it all in the round, as well as the learning and teaching aspects as well.
Thank you. Phil, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to add a danger as you move into school leadership, which is that sometimes people start to work in silos. When you work in a department, it's very obvious that you're one team and everyone needs to know what's going on. So if you're coordinating Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4, it's fairly obvious you need to work with all teachers to do that. And so it's very collegiate and very team-based. When people move to school leadership, sometimes they're responsible for learning and teaching or for pastoral, for well-being, whatever it might be, and they start to work in that silo without coordinating across. And there's no way that learning and teaching can work without talking to well-being, without talking to performance. So make sure that you're working in the round, make sure you're thinking about how you keep that network alive, I think. So be careful not to silo yourself.
Okay, great. Right, questions are coming in. This is great. The next one to you again, Georgette, is that Neil shared his opinion on asking questions in interviews, but please could you share your own views on this? As an applicant, should you be considering the amount of time you're taking up on an interview day?
So I have to make the difficult decision whether to agree or disagree with my trust leader. Actually, I would say both. I agree that it's really obvious when a candidate gives you an out-of-the-box question that is, you know, something that they have Googled because they've read that it's important to ask questions of the panel. And if it's something that is quite clearly on my website or was involved in the tour, something that they should know having applied to me, that is a waste of my time and the other candidate's time that I'm seeing that day. If it's a question, though, that really challenges me and gets me to think about my school in a different way, or shows me that they have thought about a question that would really illuminate what kind of leader I am or what our school culture is, then I think that that's really powerful. I had a candidate this time last year who asked me how the school would support a child who had come out as LGBTQ, and just wanted me to give a kind of generic or anonymized example of that, which I think is probably an example that just really highlights our approach as a school and gave them the answers that they needed, but isn't necessarily something we'd put in black and white on our website. So if it's a question that challenges me, great. If it's a question they could have Googled, that they clearly have just Googled on great questions to ask at interview, that's a waste of time. I agree with Neil there.
I think my point, Richard, was about people asking multiple questions, and we have been in situations where you've had to say, well, you know, I'm afraid you've asked 6 questions now, that's enough. So it's about that balance, and I totally agree with Georgette that a great question is always very welcome, but just be conscious that, you know, you're being interviewed. It's not really great practice to switch the tables and interview the panel at length. Fine to challenge, but I would be mindful as to how often you were doing that.
Yeah, great advice, thank you. The next, and at the moment, final question, oh no, another one's just come in, is biggest interview don'ts. And I wonder if we could quickly go around the panelists actually, because I think that's a really interesting question. If everybody can just think of a couple of don'ts. Sameena, what do you think?
Not to rush to answer. If you need a little bit of time to think about the question, just think about it. If you need to hear the question again or rephrase, don't be afraid to ask. Just be prepared to answer it the way you feel happy to answer it as. Okay, thank you. Isabel?
Over familiarity, probably, with the interviewers is what I'd say. Just be mindful of trying to be jovial and it's straying, crossing a boundary.
I think particularly where the safeguarding questions are concerned. I think as well, you need to think carefully about the image you project at interview, and that isn't just in the interview room, it is across the whole interview process. So from any contact with the school to any interaction with staff, with students, you're being watched, not in a negative way, but across your whole time in the school. And we have had candidates who've been quite rude to either the receptionist or who've been rude to the ladies or gentlemen who are serving food in the canteen, and that just doesn't, that's just not what we would expect from our employees. So I think you just have to think carefully about what the impression you're giving at all times. I would also say that, and this is probably me being a little bit old-fashioned, but if I'm on the panel, I'll still have a view on this. And I think it is important to look smart, whatever smart means for you. I think people turning up looking like they've literally just got out of bed and haven't done something to tame their hair, or wear iron a shirt, or get the suit, jacket and trousers to match, or not wear trainers, or whatever it might be. I think if you need to look as if you are going to do a professional job.
Okay, that's great. Georgette, have you got any real bugbears, any don'ts?
Yeah, I have. Neil just threw me with the hair comment. Can you ask Phil and come back to me?
Phil, sorry, over to you.
I'll talk a little bit briefly about the interview lesson if you're applying for a teaching post. I think don't pitch it so safe that the children and the people observing are really bored. Which I've seen a couple of times, but on the other end of the scale, probably best not to go too wacky. There was one interview where the person being interviewed ended up crawling along the corridor, in the door, under the tables, which potentially could have been a safeguarding issue, but it was pitched entirely wrongly. And yes, we've talked on this about seeing somebody's personality, but we probably don't need to see the further reaches of it on interview.
Okay, Georgette, are you composed?
I'm composed, I'm sorry. So ironically, I would say it's about professionalism also, but for me it comes back to that thing about whether you're looking for an in to my school or an out of your current position or your current school. So I think it's really important to consider how you will talk about why you're leaving your current role, and to remain really professional when you do that. You also do not know the relationships that the people on the panel may have with your current employers, and so that's a kind of tactical reason not to do it. But just generally in terms of your professionalism, it's really important to talk positively about your previous experiences.
All right, thank you very much. Now, I think we probably are in the sort of dying stages of questions. There is one more from Richard, which Phil has requested to answer, which is absolutely fine. So impact and evidence has been mentioned a lot today. Please, could you suggest how to evidence impact of individual progress of students where it might not be possible to demonstrate this numerically? For example, taking on a challenge on a school trip.
This is a great question, and I think it's so important for anyone applying for a position within the trust, because we are looking to make a holistic difference to children, and a lot of that is not going to be seen in some sort of number to do with attainment. So I think it comes down to sort of an overarching comment about applications. We're wired to love stories. And if you can clearly weave together a story of how something you've led or you've been involved with has made a difference to a child or children in a positive way that sets them up for a successful, meaningful future, then that story is probably going to say an awful lot more than many, many numbers. Although admittedly, Sameena and mathematics might say differently.
No, I'm happy with what you're saying. That's okay.
Excellent.
Excellent. Right, would any of our panelists like to conclude with anything that hasn't been mentioned this evening so far? Neil, I want to give you the opportunity to, no. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for attending the webinar this evening and for your very sort of thoughtful questions, and I hope that you found this useful and valuable. As I said at the beginning, there will be a short evaluation survey that will come your way by email, and the BET team are happy to offer feedback on a paragraph that details an innovative learning initiative that you've been involved with, how it shows your values and the impact that it has on young people specifically, if you'd like to take that opportunity up. So that will be part of that evaluation survey that comes your way. And all that leaves me to do is say thank you very much, and the recording will be circulated too. And have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening all.
Bye.